Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in. Today I wanted to bring you guys something new. It's a Q&A video that I did with some of my Patreon supporters as a little thank you for meeting one of my little Patreon goals. We're at $100 a month. Thank you so much everybody, that's so cool. I'm really blown away that there's people out there that wanna support me and what I do, and they like the content enough on the channel that they want to give some of their hard-earned money to me every month and help support this channel and help it grow and help it get better and bring just the best content that I can out to everybody. So thank you so much, it means a lot. So I asked my Patreon supporters if they had any questions, anything at all that they wanted to ask me, and I got some really good ones. So the first question comes from my partner in crime, one of my crewmates, and one of the guys that inspires me the most in this dance. His name is Mark Siller, aka Mark's Iller, aka Markzilla. He's got a whole bunch of names. He had a really great question. The one thing that you and I have in common is a love of video games and having them inspire our movements. In what ways have they figured into yours? For me personally, I don't have too many moves or movements that are inspired by games. I do have this one move that's sort of like, I grab my foot and I throw it kind of over my, it's like kind of like a Valdez where I'm grabbing my foot, sort of, and then it comes back and I shoot through. And that's inspired by, Ness's PK Thunder 2 in Super Smash Brothers, where he shoots lightning out and it comes back and hits himself, shoots through. But other than that, I don't really have too many moves that are directly inspired by games. But what has inspired me kind of in other aspects of the dance is, like fighting games and fighting game culture. So in a lot of ways, this is I'll try and be as brief as possible, but back in the 90s, there was arcade culture before online and consoles were there, but there was no online, there was kind of nothing. If you wanted to play people, you had to go to the arcade and you had to put your money on the line. You literally had to you put in a quarter or 50 cents or whatever it costs, sometimes $1, and you put that money on the line, and it's like you are taking that person's money. Their turn is over, and that's just kind of this cool mentality that has to go in, and it was all about challenging people and being the best, and you might get smoked and then you try and figure out what the heck went on. And I mean, some people complain throws are cheap, or you can't do that or whatever, but that's scrub mentality. You don't do that. That mentality of just getting out there, challenging people and trying to be the best, and really learning to dissect stuff. And then speaking of that, one of the ways that fighting games really help me with regards to teaching in particular is, and I mentioned this in a video before, but the way that you go about learning combos in fighting games. You have this string of moves that you have to do, and at first it's this giant thing that looks so difficult to, how could you ever memorize that? Or when you do it, it's like, how could I do that? And what you have to do is you have to slowly break it down into parts and chunk things together. Learn that, okay, I have this move, this punch, and this kick, and this strength, and if I do it in this sequence, there's certain parts that'll fit together, and you lump them together, and that becomes like a little combo. And then once you commit that to muscle memory, you don't have to, that whole sequence of 3 or 4 button presses or motions or whatever becomes one move in your brain. And when I started thinking about, when I learned that, I started thinking about breaking in a completely different way of like, how do you construct the set, and how do you go about putting things into muscle memory, and then that led to, you know, how do you know what to do during freestyle and stuff like that. And so when you lump these things together, it makes it easier for things to come out, because you just think of one thing and then, you know, five moves come out in this sequence. So, you know, that was a huge inspiration for me. That was kind of a long answer, but hopefully, you know, that's something interesting. The next question is from Paolo De Sena. I don't know how to say your last name. I think that's right. But anyway, Paolo, he was an early supporter on Patreon, and he's a guy that is really, you know, a great learner, passion for learning, passion for learning just different dances, and he's a very curious guy, and I think that's a great mentality to have as a student of anything. So Paolo asked a really great question. He said, how do you put musicality into footwork? I can see it in shuffles and freezes and that kind of thing that match the music, but what about the six step or other similar footwork patterns? And yeah, that's a really great question. Like stuff like shuffles or CCs or hooks and freezes and stuff like that, whatever. It's not part of footwork, but it doesn't matter. Those things are really obvious to see, like how it's dancing. And the best way that I could put it is, you know, Paolo, you're a popper, and you know, in popping you're hitting angles, or you know, you have certain like twisto flex or whatever, and it has these movements, but you can see every part of where it's hitting that clap or the hi-hat or whatever, right? But you also have certain styles like waving or cobra or things like that, where there's not a definite like stop or part where it hits anything necessarily, and it's sort of like flowing and like a wave, right? Like water or whatever. And that's the best way that I could explain how do you dance with these circular patterns or continuous motions that don't really necessarily stop anywhere. And you know, especially with big part of my style is these direction changes that are sort of hidden through turns or cutting through patterns on the floor or whatever. It's the same idea of it flows, and it's something that you can't really explain with words, like, and it's something that you can't even really, when you see it, it's hard to kind of understand. But the more you do it and the more you get comfortable with the movement, you kind of see like how it flows with the music in the same way that a wave would flow with the music. And that's kind of the best way that I can explain it. It's hard to like know it without knowing the movements deep, and yeah. But, you know, that's the best way I can explain it, you know, waving. All right, so the next question is from Jameson de Guzman. Again, I don't know how to say your last name. I think it's de Guzman. Anyway, Jameson is one of the guys that helped inspire me to make this Patreon to begin with, and, you know, make more content with the channel. And these recent, what do you call them? Breaking down the basics, I forget what I called it, but you know, that's heavily inspired by his series that he does called Flipping the Foundation, and these small little kind of bite-sized tutorials that are very simple and very easy to kind of like digest, and you get a very clear direction of what you're learning. You know, he heavily inspired me, and he's always inspired me. He's a great dancer, great popper, great teacher. I learned a lot from seeing how he teaches and stuff like that, so shout outs to him. What were one or two big game-changing points in your dance journey, and how did it help you grow? Honestly, I would say that it's hard to pinpoint exactly when it was, but I guess the moment that I started traveling is one big moment. you know, that's just opens up your mind to, and opens up your eyes to so much of what's out in the world, and just kind of where you stand on a more international level. Because when you're in your city, you might be good, but you're good for that city, and you might be really good internationally, but you won't know until you get out there and you test yourself. And so that's the cool thing that I like about traveling and going to these events. And it's not even necessarily about testing yourself in the competition, but like you go and you connect with other people, and you meet people, and you see different things and different approaches, and it just opens your mind. And you know, this channel, like one of the big goals with this channel that I want to do is show you how stuff that you learn in breaking applies to the rest of your life. And that's one of the things too, is like, because I traveled through breaking, I got exposed to all these different places and different people and different approaches, and it's the same thing with life. You know, if you just go and travel and you see different cultures and whatever, it just opens your mind to different ways of looking at anything, whether it be dance or whether it be, you know, how to live your life or whatever. So that was a big thing, was, you know, when I started traveling. And I gotta really credit Rory for pushing that. He's a guy kind of, when I got into the crew, he was sort of like a, you know, like a leader. There wasn't a leader, but he was kind of the guy really pushing things and encouraging people to get out there. He was always like, oh, there's this jam here, let's go. He even bought like this cheap van that we used to kind of do these road trips around, and shout out to Roxy, rest in peace. Yeah, but he encouraged all of us to get out there and travel and go to these things and represent and stuff like that. And the other thing I would say was very recently, you know, well, okay, it became more clear recently, but I guess the first time that I experienced a really good cipher, a really good circle, where, this is kind of hard to explain, but it's the kind of circle that emerges when people stop caring, in a sense. Like they stop trying, like egotistically caring, like what, you know, I gotta show people that I'm amazing and this kind of stuff. And there's just certain times where, yeah, you might be doing that, but it's more like you're not trying to one-up people and show that you're better. You're just kind of trying to show what you do and share what you do, in a sense. And those kind of moments, it's really hard to explain. Like when it gets going and there's this flow to the circle, and you know, you don't have the thing where two people come in and they're just like dancing at each other and no one wants to give up, and you know, that kind of thing just breaks that flow for me. But it's like people just, there's this unspoken order that people just know who's going in next, and if people go in at the same time, one person will just be like, they'll back off and they just like let people go. So there's this flow that's happening, and you know, even if you're watching and you're part of this thing, and especially when you go in, it's this feeling of like you're not really paying attention so much to yourself and what you're doing and who's around you, and in many ways it's like time and space sort of disappear, and your idea of yourself, like who you are and thinking about yourself and what you're doing, kind of disappears, and you're just flowing and you're just doing this stuff, and that's like, to me, that's truly being in the moment. And it's a really hard thing to do, and it really depends on a lot of factors of your own physical fitness and your mental training, and like, you know, how well do you know your movements and stuff like that, but then also the music, the atmosphere of the venue, who's there in the circle with you, and are they elevating it with you. And it's like when you get into those moments, it's people taking this thing higher and higher and higher and higher. And you know, you'll hear, I've had this conversation with many people, like actually just recently with Frost, we were just talking about that. People, they come together and like we're building it into this thing, and it's everyone is getting, you know, onto this like different plane of existence kind of thing. It sounds kind of like, you know, whatever, hippie-ish or whatever you want to call it, but hey, if you've never experienced it, you can't say anything. So yeah, I sound like a druggie or whatever here. Next question comes from Vinny Reyes. Vinny the Voyager, you can check his interview out. Really great guy. If you're ever in Belgium, this guy will show you a great time. He'll take care of you. This guy, I don't know, he's yeah, he's a great guy. So Vinny's question is, are there significant, big or small, differences between the Japanese and Canadian or US, we'll say North American breaking scene, both positive and negative? I would say, yeah, there's some pretty big differences. It's probably, you know, but it's more similar than it is different, I would say. But some of the big differences to me is that, in my opinion, you know, and it's always hard because, you know, you don't speak the language fluently, so it's hard to really get into how people think about the dance. But just from what I've seen, it is very competition heavy. You know, even in Vancouver or North America, like, there's still competition heavy, but a lot of jams make time for like ciphers and just time to get down and get free without any kind of competition setting. But Japan is more, yeah, it feels very competition heavy, competition focused, more like, yeah, competitive, and it's about like pushing yourself and being the best or whatever. But there's not a lot of time for just kind of free expression kind of thing. And in some ways that kind of makes sense with a lot of way that Japanese culture is. It can be very, you know, orderly and rigid sometimes, but that's not to say that people aren't super creative and there aren't people who could jump into a cipher and just kill it and just be totally free. But yeah, that's like kind of one of the big things that I got from going to the events in Japan. And another thing, like, and this is again really hard to kind of tell whether it's true or not, but I feel like a lot of people are very maybe set oriented. They plan what they're gonna do, or they have a sequence of movements that they're gonna do, like, you know, in advance. And everyone does that to an extent, but I feel like there's a lot, it kind of is a little more in Japan, that people are more set and oriented, more planners, more less kind of like free expression kind of thing. Like, you know, to contrast, like someone like Free, his name is literally Free, someone like Free, or you know, like Woody from Dance Brooms, or Orb, or you know, guys in my crew like So Sick. They just kind of go out and they do stuff, you know, they've practiced stuff, but it's less planned. So, and that's not to say that people don't dance in Japan, but, and there's a big culture of like drilling stuff and practicing things and stuff like that. But I see it a lot, especially with like footwork. People that are really into footwork in Japan, like, they'll have these really complicated things, but sometimes I'm like, okay, where's the connection with the music? I'm not seeing that. And it's just like, you know, they're going through these things that they've drilled and these cool sequences and stuff, but it's very, yeah, like set oriented. And again, I gotta mention this again, that this is not everyone, and you can't generalize a whole country's scene, and it'll completely depend on where you go. But yeah, that was a big difference. And another difference that I and it kind of contrasts with what I just said, but there's a lot of dancers here that their way of moving is really like, it kind of works in this weird opposition. That some people are like super wild and you know, their form is a little like unpolished or whatever, but it's kind of dope in that way that like it reminds me in some senses of like how the old dancers would dance. If you watch like, there's a famous like old Zulu Kings, like I think it's Beaver from the Freshest Kids, they show this clip of Beaver from Zulu Kings, and he's doing this like crazy like pop, 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 kind of like crazy wild style footwork. And there's some people here that kind of have that sort of same spirit, which is kind of weird because I just mentioned how like set oriented a lot of people are. But yeah, there's that a bit of that feel with certain people. I will say one similarity is that I see a lot of people doing like Canadian style footwork, Canadian style leg work or whatever, and I guess it's just popular in trends, and I don't know, but I just get really bored of it, and seeing the same dead leg from 90% of the people doing footwork here, it's kind of whatever. Vinny had a second question. He said, how did it feel to restart your breaking career in Japan? You told me about the new wave of Japanese b-boys coming to Vancouver every year. So when you arrived in Japan and went to your first events, did people know who you were? Did you tag along with the people who came to Vancouver, or were you all by yourself? It was a little bit of all of that. You know, I don't know if anybody's ever moved to a different country, especially when it's a country that they don't speak your native language, and especially in Japan, you know, everyone learns English, but no one can speak it. Almost no one can speak it. They know like hello, and they know this is a pen for some reason. Stuff like that. It's really weird. That's a whole other thing. But yeah, like when I first came here, it was tough because the area that I live in, I didn't really know anybody from here, from this area, so I kind of had to start over again. Everyone that I knew, for people who don't know, I live in Kyushu, which is in the south of Japan, and I had heard about a few people from Fukuoka, which is it's maybe a couple hour drive from where I am, but I had never met anyone, so I had no connections. The only connection was one like locker that lived in Fukuoka, and she knew someone that knew a b-boy that knew someone in the city that I was moving to, and so that was my initial connection. And I met up with him, but again, he couldn't speak English, and my Japanese was pretty bad at the beginning. But you know, that's how it works. You kind of have to just get out there and try and meet people, and it was tough for sure. And I think maybe this is something about Japanese culture, that people are very friendly, but it's hard to kind of feel like you're a part of the in-group in a sense. Like you feel like an outsider for a long time, and you know, you'll go to an event and people will say what's up to you, and you know, they might joke around with you, but then afterwards it's like, if you don't know someone, or you don't kind of like, yeah, it takes a while that you could say that about anywhere, but I feel like it's more so in Japan that people can be in some ways less welcoming, but in many other ways super welcoming. It's kind of strange, but that's just how I felt. And yeah, so it was just kind of like the random connections, and then you go there and you just try and make connections with whoever you can, and you know, it's tough though, because my area, there's not a lot of people, so I ended up doing a lot of traveling within Japan, and just like if there was any event I would just try and go, even if it was just for a weekend, and I would get on a plane, go to the event, and then stay the night, and then go back the next day, sometimes. So, you know, and for those kind of events, usually I had to know someone who's going to go and connect with them and say, hey, you want to enter this jam or whatever. But yeah, it's kind of tough, yeah, I would say. And as far as people knowing me, people didn't know me, but then after they met me, then they kind of like looked up online, and some people found like Massive Monkey Day stuff. That's my like one claim to fame. So they were like, oh, you know, wow, I didn't know he's this guy or whatever. So yeah, but I wasn't like known really. There's a few people that maybe knew me, but not really. Next question is from Ray. Ray is one of my students actually on Patreon. He gets the monthly private lessons, and actually, you know, he's really serious about it. And we usually do 2 a month, and you know, he's got a real passion for learning. He's really serious. He asks a lot of questions and great attitude as a student. So, you know, shout outs to Ray. One of the things that came up in one of our lessons was kind of this idea of turning mistakes into moves, and he wanted to ask, what is the thought process for turning a mistake into a move? The thing about like creativity and making things or realizing things is like, in a lot of ways you have to turn off your orderly brain or your conscious mind in some senses. It's weird. Like, I've been reading a lot of psychology and stuff and learning about what makes creativity and all this stuff. So it kind of helped me understand this stuff a little better. But it's very complicated, I think. But the best way that I could explain that, the thought process of like turning a mistake into a move, is having the awareness that that mistake has potential to become something, that there's something interesting within that mistake. Because if you're, and the best way that I could explain this is having tunnel vision, or like this kind of focused view of something, of what you're trying to do, versus sort of this like wide open view. And if you have that focused view of like, I'm trying to do this move, so any mistake, I gotta throw it away, and it's not this move. And that's, you know, that serves the purpose of like, if you really want to get this move, if you want to get windmills or something like, or head spins, you gotta focus on it and you gotta really work on it. And that's great at times, but I think if you can kind of do both at the same time, in a sense, you focus on this thing, but have an awareness of like, if you make a mistake, being able to look at that mistake. And this is especially helpful if you record your stuff, that when you re-watch it, sometimes like you watch the times that you fail, don't fast forward through it, look through that and see, like, just see how it looked. Because sometimes you'll notice something that you wouldn't have thought of, because you made a mistake and you fell in this weird position. But if you have that kind of like open view, you sometimes will see potential in something that you might not work on. You might not shift the focus, but you might just be like, okay, I gotta remember that, or I'm gonna work on that next practice, or something like that. And it's really about shifting that hyper focused view into a more broad view of seeing potentials in moves. And that's the kind of thing that you can't practice that necessarily. You kind of just have to, I don't know, like a lot of things when it comes to creativity and making moves and stuff, sometimes I think it's not even about how you think, it's just about doing a lot of stuff and making a lot of things and going through these processes, and basically you're taking what's going on up here and putting it out into movement and creating a lot of things. And through that process you're gonna see a lot of things that are interesting because you tried it out and you visualize. It's the same kind of thing of like, you have these thoughts, and sometimes writing it down can really help solidify an idea for a writer or whatever. Or even just if you're doing, like, say, your own mental, like, behavioral cognitive therapy, you know, like writing stuff down, writing your thoughts out and then working through them, but getting it out of your brain and into something concrete can do a lot, can do wonders. So with dance, that's putting it into movement, and then again recording it and reviewing that helps you kind of actually see it from an outside perspective. And so that's a great way to see mistakes sometimes, and hopefully you can recognize something. But that doesn't mean, like, you can't go looking for, oh, there's a mistake, okay, what, there's got to be something. Sometimes there's nothing. So, but it's just having that awareness that, like, it could be something. Like, if you have this kind of view, you're not going to see that interesting thing that's, like, I don't know, if you're a hunter and you're focused on your prey, but you're so focused on this one that's off in the distance that you don't even notice the one that's right beside you, that kind of thing. But if you have that peripheral vision, you can be like, okay, I want to get that one. Oh, what's that? There's another one over there. Bam, I'm gonna grab it. Whatever. It's that same kind of thing, like being able to see these things that are on the side that could be interesting things, or like, you know, I want to eat this gazelle, but you know what? There's actually some berries over here, and you know, I'll just do that for now. If you're a bear, I don't know. Berries are good. That's a random tangent, but anyway, hopefully that answered something in your question. Next question is from Alex Desroches. Alex, aka Suji. You can check out his interview too. Alex is he does a English and mostly French podcast called Tales of the Cypher, documenting a lot of the Montreal and Quebec scene. And if you're interested and you can speak French, they do have some English interviews. It's a really great podcast. He's, Suji's super professional with his stuff. The interviews flow really well, and the quality is superb. And you can support him on Patreon. So if you're a French speaker, check it out. Alex asked, who are your biggest footwork inspirations? And from each of those inspirations, what did you take from them? What did you get from them? What did you take away from them? It's a good question, and I got a lot of inspirations, a lot. But as far as biggest inspirations, the first was definitely Wicked. And from him, I got the idea of like form and crispness to the way that you move and the way that you do your movements. Like if you watch, and especially his older, like maybe, what would it be, like late 90s, early 2000s kind of, when you see him do that forward, especially his three-step, that guy's a master of the three-step. The way that he did stuff, and the way that, like, especially, he does these bouncing CCs and stuff. But there's this clip, I'll try and find it and put it in this video, but it was just of him doing like six-step, and the way that he hooked and stopped the movement. It's almost like, sometimes you see someone hit a CC or hit a hook, and it's kind of like they didn't hit it 100%. It's kind of hard to explain, but like it looks sort of like they're just doing it. But when I saw Wicket do his hooks or his CCs, it was like the same intensity as like jumping into a baby freeze and sticking that freeze. And so that's also another thing that I took away from him, is like the way that you do a CC or the way that you do a hook or anything that you do in footwork is like, it's got to have that same, it's almost like a freeze in itself. It's a mini freeze. When you hit that CC, you pause for like a brief second, or you have to like tense everything up to stop it completely 100%, like boom, on a dime. Like if I'm doing that or whatever, I gotta tense up my muscles to stop it, right? It's the same kind of thing with a CC. Like you can't do it lazy. So that was something that I took away from him. And then, you know, then I saw guys like Po One. You know, he has that, there's a bunch of guys that kind of fall into this category of like Po One, Ken Swift, and Migas, of guys that do super like creative flow. Well, okay, Migas is a separate thing. We'll address him in a second. But guys like Ken Swift and Po One, like they have that super traditional kind of feel. They know the history because they've been doing it for so long, so they know that traditional style. But they also had this approach of like how they approach creativity and how the kinds of moves that they do, and you know, so it was that mix of like highly creative and highly traditional styles that came together, and especially Po One. But you know, Ken Swift was, you know, if you look at his like late 90s, early 2000s footage, like that guy has an incredible flow. And yeah, so it's that perfect mix of creativity and traditional, like pushing boundaries and then respecting tradition. And then, okay, I mentioned Migas, and when I saw him, his was more about like flow and obviously like crazy creativity, but like this insane flow and this sort of like blending that, yeah, traditional, you know, New York kind of style, or you know, whatever. It's kind of like the quintessential Toronto kind of style, which is very heavy on like traditional stuff, and then European like leg work and that kind of flowing style, and they took it into their own realm or whatever. But yeah, Migas kind of opened my eyes to that kind of stuff. And then I guess the last person would be probably, well, okay, there's two more. Lego. And what I got from him was the idea of building stories or building, you know, sets. But I like the idea of stories more because you're taking people on a journey of where is this movement gonna go, that kind of thing. So he's like a master of that, and so he was the one that made that clear in my head of like, this is an important aspect, or is this something that I liked and I wanted to experiment with and try. So, you know, that's where I built a lot of these kind of footwork, well, whatever, combos and stuff. But yeah, it's like that idea of building stories with your movement. And the last guy, and he's probably the most recent inspiration, is Bounce. And I got several things from him. Some of them I was kind of already maybe on that path, but just learning from him like solidified them as like, that's something that, yeah, it's worth exploring and worth continuing. There's things like direction changes. Well, that one is directly inspired by him, and guys like Rory in my crew. Direction changes, but not just like a CC, but those hidden direction changes through turns or through cutting through patterns on the floor. Like if you're doing a 6-step like this and you cut through and then you go the other way, stuff like that, or stuff like the pump turn, and you're doing stuff and you're facing this way, and then you do the pump turn and now you're facing that way, and maybe you're going in the same direction but your orientation has changed, stuff like that. It's like subtle little things that if you don't know what you're looking at, you might not even realize it. But people who know what's up, they're like, damn, like, yo, he just changed direction, like you didn't even see that, whatever, that kind of thing. And then yeah, a lot of that awareness of positions and how they overlap with other positions, and seeing that, oh, okay, I start in this position, but through the course of this, say, combo or whatever, I end up in this position. But hey, I have this other move that starts from that position, or in the middle of this thing, like I have a move that'll match, so I can just put it in there. So yeah, that's that. All right, next question comes from Junya. You can also check him out on the interviews. So Junya is a b-boy that I met in Japan, and for whatever reason we just kind of like clicked and connected, and he's been one of my good friends over here. So, you know, shout outs to Junya for being a supporter and just being an all-around cool guy. So Junya asked, how long have you been interested in wrestling, and if you have some moves that are inspired by wrestling, I want to know. So I've been interested in wrestling since like 90. Well, in the early 90s, my brothers watched it, and so I got to see Ric Flair in the WWF and Legion of Doom and Hulk Hogan and Macho Man and these guys, but I was kind of too young at that point to really like process it. But then in the mid to late 90s, I really got into it with the Monday Night Wars and WCW and WWF, and then the NWO, and especially when the NWO came out, like, you know, I was hooked every week. I was like, but at that same time, Bret Hart was kind of in his prime, in his peak, and it was all happening at the same time. So that was an amazing time for wrestling, and that's when I really got into it. As far as moves that are inspired by wrestling, I got a bunch, and sometimes the move came first, and then the connection with wrestling came later, and other times it was the other way around. But you know, I have one that's inspired by the figure four, the way that Ric Flair would, well, when you do the figure four, you step around and then lock it, go into that four, lock in the four. That's a go down. I have a move that's called the sharpshooter, which is like, you know, when you put someone in the sharpshooter, their legs are crossed like this. So I thought I ended up in this kind of weird cross-legged position, and then I jump up and pull my feet into that sort of cross position. I got another move this one came later. It's like a turnbuckle figure four, or, you know, I just like Bret Hart, so I named it that, but it's more like a Texas cloverleaf. That's all I can think of off the top of my head. I do have a video that shows a lot of these inspirations, so you can check that out. But as far as like moves, that's it. But then there's the whole idea of, again, storytelling, and another thing that helped me understand that, like, stories are the things that people connect with. And in wrestling, the best wrestlers could tell good stories. And again, this is a big parallel between wrestling and breaking. You know, especially now, that art of storytelling is kind of lost, and what you have now is a lot of people, they call them spot monkeys, and it's like people who will go out and they're just trying to entertain the crowd, but they're going about it in a way that's like, especially on the indies, because you're just traveling around, you're doing one-off shows, you can't get people to connect over this long-term story. It's hard to do that. So what they end up doing is, like, you just put on a good match and you just do crazy things, and because you're not on national television all the time, you can go to this place and do your thing, and then go to this other place and do the exact same thing, and you just kind of have your thing, your spots that you go through. And you see it a lot right now, especially AEW. They got a lot of indie guys. So you see them, and like if you've seen one match, you've kind of seen a lot of what they do. And everyone does this to an extent, but yeah, it's like certain people, they just do moves, and it's like, it's incredible to watch. But then the more you see it, the more you're just like, okay, I've seen this match before. I know how it's gonna play out in general. And it's the same kind of thing with like breaking, where you have certain people that just do moves for the sake of doing moves. There's no context to them. There's no build up or anything. It's like someone who just, if you ever went to like a club or something, and if you started to break or whatever, or just your friends like telling you, oh, you break, like do a backflip, and it's like, do a move, just do this thing. And that's a lot of people's perceptions, and a lot of people who don't get deep into these things, like that's what they think it is. And a lot of people who don't get deep into wrestling, they think wrestling is just doing big moves and stuff. But the meat and potatoes of wrestling is stories, and even if they're simple stories of like working a body part, or selling something, selling an injury or something like that, you know, these subtle little details, that those are, in my opinion, those are the people that I always got inspired by. And it's that idea of storytelling and connecting with people on a different level of like this, what do you call it, like high impact or like visceral, whatever, maybe that's the wrong word, like connection of like, wow, that's amazing. It's just like shock value, like beyond that, of like taking them on this journey. And so it's a lot more subtle, and it's a lot more detail oriented. But that's always the kind of style that that's the style that I've cultivated over the years, I guess. And it's not for everyone, and some people probably find it boring, but you know, I dance for me really, and it's not necessarily for them. So but it's that idea of building up into moments and stuff like that. So that's a big inspiration that I took from wrestling. My last question comes from Leo Win. Win is my most recent supporter on Patreon. Thanks so much. What are some of the injuries you've sustained over the years from dancing? I've been really lucky that I never had any major injuries. When I was When I was younger, I did dislocate my left thumb, so it's a little, I can still feel it. It's a little weird when I move it around to certain limits. And I did that, it was really dumb. I was doing this like freeze, and I was putting my knee on this elbow, but for some reason I did like, you know, the fingertip kind of thing. I did that, and it was just too much weight, and it went, and that was pretty messed up. And I was like, oh my god, and I popped it back in myself. That was probably not the best thing to do, and I could still move it around and stuff, but yeah, it's still a little tender after all these years, and I can't move it as freely as my right thumb. And then recently, in the last like say 6 years, I've developed this knee problem on my right side, my right knee, inner knee. Not exactly sure. I went to the physio, and they seem to think it was like one of my meniscus, whatever, cartilage is being like pinched or something like that, and it comes and goes. So I have a feeling it's, you know, overworking one side or overworking one like muscle, and so I gotta balance that out, like the inner quad or something like that, and build that up. So I try and just listen to my body, and if stuff hurts, I stop, or I take it easy, you know. And maybe that's one reason why I'm not one of these greatest in the world or something like that, because I think if you want to get to that point, you gotta push yourself, and you'll get injuries. But I'm just like, I don't want to get injured, so I just listen to my body, and if it hurts, I stop and I take a break. And my style's changed a lot over the years, and I do less crazy things. And even recently I do a little less footwork, and I've been doing a lot more top rock, but I still just try and dance. And that's the main thing. It's like my motivation for why I do these things has changed a lot. So yeah, I've been really lucky. I only had those two things really. Oh yeah, one time when I was like really young, like my first year, I smashed my heel on the bed frame in my room, or one of the rooms in my house. That really hurt, but that just took like a small chunk of my flesh. That was it. Yeah, so that's it. That's all the questions. Thank you so much to everyone who submitted a question. These were really great, and I hope that I can make this either a monthly thing, or if I don't get enough questions, I might save it for the next month and build it up. But these were really great, and I love the discussion. I love all the discussion that I'm able to get through connecting with these people on Patreon and through YouTube, and it's really been a source of like motivation and joy in my life. So thank you so much to everyone, and again to everyone who supports on Patreon. Like, thank you so much. It means so much that again people are willing to give me money to do the stuff and talk about the stuff that I love. Like, you know, I don't take that for granted at all, and thank you so much. And you know, again, for people who are watching this on YouTube and haven't checked out my Patreon page, please check it out. If you like the stuff that I do on this channel, give it a thought, consider it. All this stuff goes back into making the channel better, making things better, improving things, doing more for the community, getting more knowledge out there, and you know, it all goes back into trying to build this thing into something bigger and better. So thank you so much. And with that, we're out. Peace.